There is no denying that BJJ students put a ton of value on being awarded their next belt. It's completely understandable as that belt represents countless hours of blood, sweat, and tears. However, how do you assess when someone is ready for that next belt? If you do it too soon, it can have a big impact on their success and their performance, but if you do it too late, they can become disheartened and quit training altogether. In this video, Chelsea and I are going to discuss the 3 main criteria we use to assess students for their next belt, and also the red herrings that make students seem ready for their next belt when they're not quite. Before we jump into that, just in case you don't know who we are, my name is Tom Barlow, and along with my wife Chelsea, we run Escapology BJJ in Cambridge. We've managed to grow our academy up to just under 300 students from the post-pandemic level in about 2 years, and we maintain a 2% attrition rate. On top of that, we have a very successful competition team who compete pretty much at the highest levels of jiu-jitsu. So, the way that we assess belt criteria is on 3 different things. And the first one, and the most important one, is the person. Okay, that is above all what you should be basing your criteria on. Every single one of your students is totally different. They have different jobs, they have different ages, they're different places in their lives, different levels of athleticism, different goals, all kinds of different things. But none of that should stop them from getting a black belt. Okay, that is really, really important. Both Chelsea and I really firmly believe that anybody from any background can achieve a black belt. It might just take them longer or shorter depending on what their goals are. So when we're looking at the person, there's a few key things that we consider. So the first one is their age.
Yeah, so obviously there's age limits on belts. So kids can only get up to a certain belt level. And you don't want to be promoting people outside of that framework because that can cause problems for them later. But a younger athlete is going to need more time at certain belt levels than others, and you really have to consider what the person, how old the person was when they started jiu-jitsu as well, when you're considering their progression.
Yeah, that's really, really important. We literally just last night promoted a guy called Steve, who's I think in his 60s now, and he only started 59,
yeah.
I think. He was relatively old when he started jiu-jitsu. I don't expect Steve to be able to do birimbolos. He's not led necessarily the most active lifestyle. He's not kept his body in the best condition as possible.
But
he's trying his best, and he's doing what he can to improve his skills and improve his jiu-jitsu. Now, does that mean he shouldn't be able to get a black belt? Absolutely not. He should definitely be able to do that. There's going to become a point in my life and everybody's life where they can no longer physically perform all the things they can do. But if they still have that depth of knowledge, the understanding of what they should be doing, they can still get a black belt.
If you think about gymnastics, for instance, Olympic level gymnasts don't maintain the ability to do those skills throughout their lives, but that doesn't mean they've lost the knowledge or they've somehow completely lost all of that ability. It's just that fitness and your body's breakdown will have an impact on whether or not you can perform certain skills.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at let's say Elio, right? Elio was 96, I think, when he died. I mean, there was all these rumors about him still training to the day that he died, but it was definitely not at the level he was when he was 40 or 30 or 20. It's just not possible. The body does not work that way. But again, because someone's starting later in life and maybe they didn't have that experience of being younger and able to do all this more dynamic movement, shouldn't stop them from getting a black belt. The next thing that we tend to look at is their goals. So what are they trying to achieve? Are they trying to be an elite level competitor? Because that's a very different path than someone who's an accountant who's just training 3 days a week. They need different things. Sometimes they might get held longer at specific belts, or sometimes they might need to get jumped up quicker, depending on where they're at in their life.
Yeah, if you have a juvenile blue belt who's just tearing up competitions, they transition to adult, you don't need to hold them at blue belt. Yeah. You just don't. They can go to purple belt. It's fine.
A really great example of this is Cole Bart, right? He went, I think he was purple belt at the start of 2023, and then he was a black belt by the end of 2023. Because, he'd spent a long time training and a long time developing his skills, a relatively long time at blue belt, because that's just how the juvenile belts
You
are
don't
structured.
really have a choice once you get to blue belt.
And
You
then,
have to kind of stay.
you know, he raced through those other belts. You know, he won Europeans as a purple belt, and then he jumped to worlds. You know, he was competing in ADCC. So he needs to be a black belt, and at that point, there would be
holding him at any of those belts would have been sandbagging. Like it would have been, whether or not the rules necessitated him being there or not.
Yeah, and it serves no benefit to that person to hold them at like a purple belt for a year and a half, or a brown belt for a year and a half,
because that's the thing that's done.
Yeah, they're already competing at the highest level, and really, like, you know, that's what you want to build your name at. No one's going to build their name off, like, you know, their purple belt career particularly. It doesn't work like that. You know, once you hit brown belt, what you did at purple belt doesn't really matter too much. You're in a different pool of people. Same, all of those color belt things, when you get to black belt, well, that's your level now. That's what we needed to be working towards. And it's the same for Cole. Now, we had the same thing with one of our students. You know, he came in as a very good competitor, but he needed to, he was in his mid-20s. He needed to be competing at black belt, so he got the experience of being black belt and being in those events and being in those competitions, even if he wasn't necessarily quite ready for that. You know, he's going to have that kind of on-the-job black belt training, but that's where he needs to be.
Because that's the choice that he made.
Yeah, there's no benefit to us keeping him at brown belt.
And then, winning stuff. That doesn't matter. Yeah,
and then winning stuff. But then when it comes to, like, you know, he gets his black belt and he's 29, maybe 30. Like, that now he's out of that adult competition. And that's not a great position to be in. So it
doesn't mean you can't be 30 and be successful in adult competition. The point is that if you want to be successful at really high levels in adult competition, you really have to start that quite early.
Yeah. It is really, really important. Being in that environment, being around these, like, you know, hungry athletes who are dedicated to this, it makes a big difference. You know, if we'd have waited 2 years, he can get 2 years being in that environment, or 2 years, like, winning brown belt competitions. Put him in the environment, you know, because so that he's going to have that on-the-job training. It's going to be a tougher route for him, but ultimately it'll help him become a better athlete and a better jiu-jitsu player. And it's the same for those other guys, you know, the guys that are just out there, you know, being weekend warriors. They do the odd comp here and there, you know, they're training a few times a week. Like, do you need them to be, like, world-class competitors
in the world?
Like, no, man. Like, they're on a different journey. They're on a different path. And again, like, if they're meeting the other criteria that we set for them, why can't they achieve a black belt? You have different ranks of black belts. It's just part of the sport. Not everybody is going to be the same. And you shouldn't really base your criteria on that as well. Okay. The final thing that we kind of tend to look at in this was two other things, actually. The next thing is, like, their background. Okay, we've discussed this a little bit, but, you know, what's their job? You know, what is their family circumstances? Like, we've got a guy who trains with us. When he started, he had 3 kids under 3. Like, and he was still training as much. He was pretty young, but, like, that's a lot to be taking on.
So, like, you have on the one hand, he's quite young, you know, quite athletic. But on the other hand, he's got this other thing that's slowing him down, and you have to take that into account. You cannot compare him to a childless 25-year-old. It's not fair.
It's very different. And, you know, like, as we talked about with, like, you know, Steve earlier, the guy we promoted to purple belt, like, he's in a different point in his life. Like, works full time, trains, you know, he started training very consistently, like, a few times a week, doing his best. Like, he's happy to roll with anybody. That's important, you know. So that kind of background, where they're at in their life, makes a difference. It makes a big, big difference.
So you have to know. That's the other thing, is that you have to know everybody. You have to know everybody to a certain extent to be able to promote them.
Yeah, exactly. The final thing that we look at this is, like, their character. Like, how are they in the training environment? Like, are they good people inside and outside of the mat? You know, are they supportive of the community? You know, are they welcoming to new people? How do they treat the people around them? Because that's an important part of jiu-jitsu. Like, I'm not going to promote someone who's an asshole. Like, that's just, like,
we regularly hold kids back when they're misbehaving.
Yeah.
We will regularly keep them from progressing if they are engaging in behavior repeatedly that we don't like, and we'll tell them why.
Yeah, it's important. Like, we very much look at not rewarding kind of negative behavior with the kids specifically. So if they're not performing, they're not being a good teammate to the people around them, they're not going to get promoted. Even if they're winning in competitions. Like, for us, that's really low down on the priority level. Like, I'm not about like just having guys that are great at competing. It's people that are also good people is important, you know, for the longevity of the sport as much as anything else. We're always hearing about these scandals of people who get to positions of power and then abuse it, and we don't want to be a part of that system. So that's kind of our the way that we look at the person. The next area we look at is the pillars. And what I'm going to do is jump over to one of our blueprints. Okay, these blueprints are something that we created actually off the back of one of our affiliates who asked us.
Seems like ages
Yeah,
ago.
it was. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. But it was off the back of a request from one of our affiliates who was like, well, what criteria do you use for promoting people? Because most jiu-jitsu academies don't have a set curriculum. And honestly,
And you
most...
probably shouldn't.
Yeah, most... Oh, sorry, not a set, like, grading...
Yeah, set of standards that you have to meet.
Right? And honestly, that's kind of outside of what jiu-jitsu is. Like,
Yeah, you shouldn't really be doing belt tests or anything like that.
Yeah, like, am I going to be using the same set of skills as someone who's, like, 67 kilos versus someone who's, like, 100 plus kilos? And they're probably going to be quite different. Like, the choice of guards that I make, the way that I play jiu-jitsu is going to be different. So having someone who's just testing on the same criteria and not have any flexibility, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you look at it as a more holistic approach of like their overall jiu-jitsu game, where are they at? What are they, do they have a guard? It doesn't have to be the same guard for everybody, but do they have an understanding different layers of guard?
Should we get into it?
We'll get onto the pillars.
Yeah, Tom's just going to talk if I let him. So
the first area that we came up with is the pillars of jiu-jitsu. Okay, and these are 10 literally pillars that form the foundation of if you're going to be good in jiu-jitsu, essentially. And we look at any single student is like, for a blue belt, I think we've set it at like, it's either 70 or 80%. We can look at it at the end. They should be holding to these pillars 70 to 80% of the time when they're training, when they're sparring. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so pillars are pretty self-explanatory when you look at them. Like, if you're on top, stay on top. That's like very important,
it's something
fundamental.
we say a lot in the academy.
Yeah, and you're going to get those leg locker guys out there who are like, well, what about falling back for foot locks? And it's like, that normally doesn't work. If you watch enough competition, you'll see that guys, when they fall back for a leg lock, the other person comes on top, closes the space too quickly, and they actually lose it a lot of the time. That's not saying that you can't do that, but you need to build that after having these strong pillars in place, not before. The second one is just stand up. Like,
when you fall down,
yeah, just stand
back up.
Yeah. This happens like so frequently. It's something that we actually have a video along with this as well, which goes through these in much more depth and like gives illustrations of them. But yeah, just sometimes the answer is just to stand up. That's all you have to do. The next thing, which is fundamentally crucial, is fighting in transitions. The way that jiu-jitsu is taught often is like you have, let's say, guard, and then someone passes to side control, and then we work side control escapes. That's like the latest stage escape. Like if they're passed in side control, they're in a great position, you're in a terrible position.
Being small people, we recognize the importance of making sure that you never get to the bad position.
Yeah. So the energy, the expenditure of your energy should actually happen in that point between the pass and side control. Once you're being squashed in side control, you can pretty much chill out as long as your frames are intact. And then you can recover and wait to create the movement to start escaping again. But that fighting in transition is super crucial. Often I regularly see people get in this mindset of giving up like a pass or a position. It's like, well, I know how to escape mount. The problem is when you get to a high enough level,
you won't be able to escape
You're
mount.
not going to escape mount. The chance, the opportunity to escape was before that.
I was at a women's open mat a couple weeks ago, and I was rolling with some brown belts, and we were doing specific training, and it was from mount, and they were having like panic attacks trying to escape from mount because they had just never been in a position. Women don't often experience pressure from other women. So, like, they'd never been in a situation where they just physically could not escape the position. And it was, like, terrifying for them.
Yeah. I used to have this with Braulio all the time. He's very good at putting you in positions where, like, you feel like it would be a better idea to let him do the next thing. Like, always from, like, head and arms and katagatamis and stuff like that. It's never a better idea. No matter how uncomfortable you are, you have to fight in that transition. The next thing that we talk about is if you're on bottom, you want to put your feet on your opponent. This comes into like the layers of defense. The strongest position I can be in guard is close guard. The second strongest is somewhere I'm able to push them away with the bottoms of my feet, the soles of my feet. Like mechanically, that is the most efficient way you can do it.
That's why we deadlift, squat, Olympic lift with our feet flat on the floor.
Yeah,
and
rather
not with
than
our
like off our
shins.
shins or any of that kind
Yeah.
of position. You can have those guard as like a backup to get back to your feet position, but that's what we're looking for. Like, again, it's something that we see regularly. People don't follow this rule. They'll be like playing half guard or knee shield. They're already quite deep through a passing situation.
I had this
Okay.
happen last night. Somebody asked me about half guard, and then I spent a long time demonstrating just why half guard
Yeah.
doesn't work. Yeah, it's important. You
Yeah.
have to maintain distance, or you will get squashed. Eventually, you will meet the bigger person that will squash you.
Yeah. The next thing is keep your spine in a straight line. Okay, so essentially we want to always be maintaining our posture. So anytime that my head goes off to the side, I look down. What are the other
Round
things?
your
I
back.
round my shoulders. That takes my posture away. That weakens me. So even if I'm on top mount and I start to round my spine, that weakens my posture. That's going to weaken my balance and give the person an opportunity to escape. Same if I'm passing guard and I start to hunch. Same if I'm on the bottom and I'm like, bending my spine in a weird way or moving my legs in a weird way. That makes me weak, and I never want to have that happen. The converse is also true. I should always be trying to take my partner's or to keep my partner's spine out of a straight line.
But this is about what people are doing,
Yeah.
not what they're not doing.
The next one is elbows in. Like, turning yourself into a chicken is a terrible idea. You want to keep those elbows in
Let's
and
not
protect those
demonstrate
sides.
with the T, though.
Yeah.
Tom's waving his T around. I don't want to have to clean the couch.
This is like fundamental defense, like 101. Get those elbows in, and if there's something underneath your elbows, take it out. Okay, because that will prevent you getting submitted a lot of the time.
It's difficult for people.
Yeah, that one's tricky. The next thing that we talk about is position before submission. If you're controlling the person, you're in a dominant position, the chance that you're going to win either a match or an MMA match or like a
Even
street
a
fight,
sub-only.
a sub-only match is very, very high.
Like, if you have spent an entire sub-only match mounting somebody, trying to take their back, just, brutalizing them from dominant positions, you're going to win the decision. It doesn't matter whether
Yeah.
or not...
Unless they have one of those really weird rule
stupid
sets
rules. Don't
that
fight
are like
under those rule sets.
submission attempts are the most important thing. They're not. Like, you can easily tell when someone's won a match. Like, you just have to relate it back to that. So when you go for submissions, they want to come from positions of dominance. And if you're starting to lose that submission, you get back up on top, which is what we talked about before. So a good example would be like an armbar from a mount. You fall back from the armbar, you've given up top position. If you finish it, great. But if they start to slip their elbow, your goal is to then get back up on top. Okay. Number 8 is train to compete, whether you want to compete or not. Just simply develops good habits in you. That's the most important thing. So
It's a sport. It's a full contact sport. If all you're doing is flow rolling, you should go do Tai Chi.
yeah,
Like, this is a full contact sport. You should be performing it like it's a full contact sport.
yeah, really important to have that. And you don't have to be doing that like
All
every
the
single
time.
session.
You can have ebbs and flows in your training. You can absolutely train hard for a little bit and take a little bit of time off. Like, that's not what we're saying. You don't have to engage in jiu-jitsu like we do. But you should have that ability in you because it makes you resilient.
Yeah, very, very important. The next thing that we have is practice with intent. When you are training, are you just there and kind of going through the motions, or are you focused on what you're doing, trying to improve and trying to develop? Again, incredibly important for your general growth. Someone who is always focused and always trying to develop will improve at a much faster rate, rather than if they're worrying about what they're going to have for dinner later, or chatting to their friend, or doing any of that kind of stuff. Not necessarily the best way to train. The final one is always do something. Okay, the worst thing that you can do is just let
Lay
jiu-jitsu
there.
happen to you.
Yeah.
Okay, you have 3 options. You can do the right thing, which is wonderful and you learn that. You can do the wrong thing, which is also wonderful because you learned what the wrong thing was, and next time you can maybe do the right thing, and you can do nothing.
But you only recognize which of the things you did if you are A, paying attention and practicing with intent, and B, doing something.
Yeah, that is absolutely fundamentally important. So regardless of where you find yourself when you're training, you should be trying to do something. Like, if you're in an unfamiliar guard, like, do something to see if it works, or run away and re-engage in a different manner. Okay, so that's our pillars. And what we look at is that our students, for like blue belt, I think we set it as like 80% of the time. Purple belt is at 90% of the time. and brown belt going to black belt is more like, 95% of the time. Okay, so that's what we're looking for in there. For the technical knowledge, it really depends on the belt. Okay, like there's tons and tons of different things that you can include in it. For
One
us,
of the most important things for blue belt, because I think this is honestly, blue belt is one of the hardest belts to grade. For blue belt, one of the most important things that we look for is like an ability to perform drills. Like, if I demonstrate something for you and explain it to you appropriately and give you a good amount of time, are you able to create a facsimile of what I did with your body? Like, are you able to do that? If you're not able to do that, you have no business being a blue belt, because being a higher grade is about your ability to take on more information. If you cannot mimic me after I give you a few different ways to do that, you're not ready.
yeah.
We see this a lot with guys like at white belt kind of beating each other, but then I go, can you perform this simple drill? And no, you can't perform that body movement. You are not ready to be a blue belt.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can list the technical criteria, but pretty much it follows the same fashion. We've like the start of the fight, which is like takedowns, or anytime you're re-engaging to set grips, passing, guard, submissions, escapes. Then the other thing we have is the positional hierarchy, which is very important to understand, like how jiu-jitsu happens. It's fundamental for what we do. The next thing is we look at kind of, this is what we were talking about before, like live applications of what they're doing. So we have to bridge the theoretical to the physical.
Yeah, so what I was discussing was the really fundamental basics of learning jiu-jitsu against a willing participant, right? When you take things live, you have lower expectations, but you still expect the same things, essentially. You just expect them to be less successful.
Yeah. So there's like basic kind of white belt errors for the blue belt. Again, this is all covered in our other blueprints for like the higher grades. But for our white belt, it's like, are they passing on their knees? Are they trying to do knee judo or any of those kind of things? That's not very functional. Okay. People are designed to be on their feet. That's just what they are. Don't be on your knees. You won't be able to get good movement. You won't be able to get good pressure. None of that applies. Where is their head in relation to their hips when they're passing, when they're in strong positions? Goes back to our posture. Are they hugging their partner in like side control or mount?
From the bottom.
From the bottom. Okay, because that goes back to our positional hierarchy that we talked about earlier. Are they using bad jiu-jitsu techniques? Things that work at white belt but have no place at higher levels.
This is why you have to completely ignore how white belts do against other white belts.
Yeah.
Okay? It doesn't matter whether a white belt is beating up other white belts if they're passing on their knees, because size and athleticism will give you that. The problem is that a lot of successes at white belt are kind of built on size, athleticism, strength, and those things will matter less and less as you progress through the belt. So you don't want to put somebody up to a belt level where they've been relying on those attributes for so long that they can't change, right? So this is the problem that you kind of run into when you gauge one person's success against another white belt success.
Yeah. So, like, the classic example that we've used here is like digging elbows into the thighs. That's not a jiu-jitsu technique.
No.
Like,
if you do that to me, I will look at you.
Yeah.
I will stare at you, because I guarantee somebody bigger's tried to do it to me.
Yeah. That's not really what you want to be encouraging. You want to be using good use of technique. That's what we're talking about with bad jiu-jitsu. Things that might work against white belts, but they don't work against anybody else. So anybody's got a
Punch
little bit of
chokes
skill.
from closed guard.
Yeah.
Like, it's not real. Stop doing it. So if you're doing it and I've already told you not to, you're not going to get a blue belt.
Yeah. In like all of these blueprints, everything that we teach is about like very high percentage techniques that like, so we call it like 80%, right? So 80% of the time they work against 80% of the people. That's what we look for in techniques. Okay, so like a punch choke from close guard, have I seen it used and have I seen people go to sleep? Absolutely. Do I see a lot of people doing it and regularly succeeding with it?
If
No,
you
I
can
don't.
give me an example of somebody using it at high competition like that, and it's the only one you can think of, you shouldn't be using that technique.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Because if you have an example that's an outlier, you've proven the point that it's an outlier.
Yeah.
If you have somebody who's playing a very specific guard and they are the only person doing it, you shouldn't be playing that guard, because there's a reason that person is the only person doing it. And it's not because they're innovative. It's because there's something in their attributes that is allowing them to have success with it.
Yeah.
Everybody has the ability to use their attributes to develop like successful techniques, but that comes after understanding fundamentals.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples for this is Adam Wazinski. Like,
Yeah.
Adam Wazinski has an
who I was
amazing
thinking of,
butterfly
actually.
guard. Like, absolutely world class. He uses it against some of the best guys
In
out
the
there.
gi, in no gi,
Yeah,
like
everywhere.
Yeah.
But can you name, other than Marcelo, who's no longer really competing, somebody who uses that same guard at high level? People often catch it. I'm talking specifically about the gi. People often catch reactive sweeps with butterfly guard,
Yeah.
but they don't set it up
nobody
in the way that he
plays
sets it up.
butterfly guard.
And that's what we're trying to get to, right? There are better guards, like De La Hiva, for example. If you wanted to list the number of De La Hiva players,
they're just
you would run out of
infinite,
fingers.
yeah.
Spider guard, close guard, like
X guard players. These are the guards that are high percentage for most people.
yeah, even like single leg X, for example, which is like, you know, not necessarily the best guard to play out there, but there's so many people that are using it at a high level that you can list off.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for.
There's a reason you can't find a half guard player and you can name a butterfly guard player. There's a reason for that. And it's because they just don't work as well.
Yeah.
And you don't want to focus on, there's so much to jiu-jitsu that you don't want to encourage people to focus on things that don't work.
Yeah, particularly when they're first starting out. They want to get as much success as possible because jiu-jitsu at the end of the day is pretty hard. Okay, so that's the thing that we're looking for. And then we're like, in terms of our criteria, we're looking at how they perform against
More experienced people.
more experienced people,
but not so much more experienced that the gulf is so big that they can't bridge it. So
exactly.
for somebody you're looking for to go to blue belt, for instance, how do they do against an experienced blue belt approximately their size, or a new purple belt that's approximately their size, or an experienced purple belt that's smaller than them?
Yeah, because that weight and size thing is really important as well. You know, that is kind of one of the things that we're always looking for. You know, there might be like, you know, there might be a 140-pound white belt, but they're going up against a 210-pound, you know, white belt who just crushes them. It's not really a fair comparison to be like, well, that person couldn't beat that white belt, so therefore they don't deserve a blue belt. It's
but
like,
if that
not really.
140-pound white belt is giving your 160-pound blue belts a hard time, then you've got a problem, right?
Yeah.
Then you've got to look at that person and say, are they really a white belt anymore? Because they're able to compete against somebody kind of similar to them in a belt level above.
Yeah. And then the final point on this one is like, are they just like demonstrating consistent work towards improvement when sparring? Like, are they just trying to go out there and like get to their position they feel most comfortable in and hold it for as long as possible, not really trying to do anything? And
Are
every
they
round,
refusing to take any advice, change anything about what they're doing wrong, even though you've told them over and over again? Like, how many times have we had that guy that won't stop playing half guard?
yeah, so many times, right? We actually, like, there was one guy in our gym, he was a white belt for a long time because his refusal to listen to what we wanted to do. He was looking for the answer that what he was doing was right, but it wasn't. And we knew it wasn't, but he kept coming to us. I keep having this problem. I can't do this. It's like, this is the solution to your problem.
Yeah.
And then he wouldn't go and adapt it. He wouldn't go and try it in class. And they would come back to me like a couple of weeks, or go to Chelsea, or I can't do this. And they would tell him the same answer, but he refused to accept that answer until one day he did. And then it was like, oh, I see that that's actually the right way to go. You know, so that's very, very important. The other thing that we have for kind of each different belt level is like the criteria. There's a few things that you want to be
Excuse me.
thinking about. So for blue belt, because blue belt's a great example, is are they a judo black belt?
Yeah.
Regardless of their jiu-jitsu experience.
And unfortunately, regardless of their judo experience.
Yeah.
So, like, even if they're kind of not a great judo black belt, they still have to go to blue belt.
Yeah. That's really, really important that you do that, because it's a hard situation to be in, but they're going to have that kind of on-the-job training, you know, and it's not fair to other white belts to have someone who's got, like, you know, even a mediocre judo black belt is going to have
the rules say that, like, if you're NCAA wrestler, you have to go to
yeah,
blue
I think
belt
they've
and
added
stuff.
things to do with, like, MMA, like if you had a couple of pro
professional
MMA fights, and based on experience. And
it's probably a good thing.
yeah, that's what you want to have happen as well. Like, there's no point in them staying as white belts because they need that upper level of competition, you know, and it's going to be a bit tough for them, but that's the situation. They have experience. They need to be in that, like, tougher area, and, like, that's really, really important that you do. The other thing is, like, we've talked a little bit about this, but, have they experienced competition? That's a good thing to do. It's not something that will necessarily hold everybody together. Are they a good training partner? Those are the things that we look at. All right, so that's kind of one of our blue belt requirement type things that you can look at. There's another kind of set of criteria that we look at for some of the upper belts. Each of the other blueprints that we created follow a similar sort of pattern. Like, these are like the technical standards that we look for.
Technical skills, live applications, and then any additional like criteria that you might want to consider when you're considering like somebody's belt level.
There's another kind of set of people that you have, which is instructors, right? They're kind of outside the norms because they can be coaching. Like, we have guys that are purple belts, so even some blue belts helping us out in classes, right? They're more into this kind of instructor area. And if they're doing, like, for example, beginners programs, which is often where we put those guys, if they're in charge of those programs, what are their students like is a really good example of their technical knowledge.
Yeah, we have a couple of affiliates, and you can look at the affiliates and the students they're producing and kind of gauge the competency and the effectiveness of the coach from the students that they're producing. And that's something to consider as well, because like we said before, the knowledge doesn't have to be, you don't maintain your ability to apply your knowledge in live training for your entire life. But is that coach able to impart the knowledge on their students? That's actually arguably a more complicated skill than just being able to do it yourself. And that's important to consider when you're considering the progression of your coaches.
Yeah. And then the other thing to look at is the goals again. Is looking at the instructor. Are they trying to be a competitor? If so, they're going to have a different set of criteria than someone who's trying to be the best coach they can be. And that's an important thing to distinguish. I don't want to spend a long time on it, but it is a distinction that you have to start thinking about.
Yes, and you have to remember also that coaching takes time, energy away from your own personal training, but that doesn't mean that they're not still like investing that time, right? So like time spent on the mat teaching is still time spent on the mat, even if you're not in a comp class, right? So that time has value, and it, like I said, arguably is a harder skill to impart knowledge than to just gain it.
Yeah. So the final area that we want to discuss are some red herrings. Okay, we've touched on these a little bit across the course of this video. The first one is time. Just time as an indicator isn't a great way to start promoting people. It's slightly different for kids because...
I mean, it is and it isn't. We make our kids wait about a year for a gray belt.
Yeah.
Which is, not an...
That's a huge amount of time for a child.
Huge amount of time for a child, but it would be a fast blue belt, but you could get a blue belt in a year.
Yeah. So time is a really important thing. If you've had someone who's a blue belt for like 5 years, but they're still making all of those same mistakes,
they can stay a blue belt.
They can stay a blue belt
if they want.
Because they need to be realistically thinking about what.
Like, why have I been
why
a blue
are you
belt
still being a blue belt
for 5 years?
If you're still making the same mistakes and you're not progressing, you need to make some changes in what you're doing. And until you adopt that attitude, you're still at that level.
I know that a lot of gyms will kind of struggle with this because there's a culture to not talk about belt progression.
Yeah.
But we always encourage our students to come to us to talk about like their progression. If they want to move towards their next belt, we're never going to be like, well, that's dumb, because the belts are set up like little trophies. Of course, people are going to want to move towards their next belt. But if somebody comes to me and they go, why am I still a blue belt after 5 years? I am happy to give them that information. That means that they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like, you should be happy that they came to you, because that is going to make everybody's life easier. You can clearly communicate and directly communicate, and they can go away going, oh, my coach knows who I am, what I need to do, and they've given me that information. There's no reason to keep this secret from each other.
Yeah, if you're looking like this, you have to remember this isn't about performance. It's about their willingness to change and adapt to learn new skills and improve themselves. Okay, like we rarely encounter this problem.
Yeah.
But I did talk about the one earlier who refused to listen to us, which is why we didn't promote him.
Yeah, he
Like,
spent a long time.
He spent a long time. It was probably it was either 6 months to a year that he spent extra as a white belt because he was making the same mistake, and he wasn't listening and wasn't willing to adapt to that process. And until he did that, he wasn't just not ready. You know, so there's a difference between someone being completely bullheaded and refusing to change and still making the same mistakes versus someone who might get crushed all of the time, but we see them trying to improve their jiu-jitsu, but they're just not athletic. They're just, you know, they're older, they don't have the same mobility, they might have some other issues, maybe they're like, whatever it is. There's a very big difference in that. So time can be a bit of a red herring, and just promoting based on time isn't a great idea.
I don't even promote kids based on time. I think that's ridiculous. Yeah. Everybody has to earn the belt or the belt means nothing.
Yeah. The next one is competitiveness against other people, like other similarly leveled people, white belts, or even people in competition as well, right? Like you can be crushing. We have a student who wins competitions, and I literally have no idea how he does it. Like I regularly see him at the podium.
I see this all the time.
Yeah,
this is a common thing in white belt competitions where you're like, one of you is way better than the other, and somehow lost.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, honestly, it's almost like his opponents. It's nothing to do with what he's doing. He makes like every mistake under the book, and then just somehow manages to come out on top.
Yeah, somehow he's in mount.
So he's won like a bunch of gold medals, you know, but he's still not ready for that next progression because he's making the mistakes that we talked about, and he's just somehow bumbling through it. You know, he needs to kind of if he can maintain that bumbling through it plus adapt his skill set, then he's going to be in a great position for the future belts. But right now he's not. He's going to hit a blue belt and just be destroyed because
people aren't going to allow the bumbling anymore.
Yeah.
And
the risk, the tolerance for like mistakes goes down,
and it's a significant jump, especially between white and blue belt. The difference I think between blue and purple belt is a little bit less, but then the skill level just increases.
So that's something, and the same in the gym as well. You can't just, you have like that ultra athletic dude who just comes in and like crushes everybody, but doesn't really show any technique. They're not going to get promoted, you know.
No. Because it doesn't matter. They're not actually demonstrating any jiu-jitsu. They're demonstrating athleticism, which is fine, but a different set of skills.
Yeah, and again, when they come up against somebody who is athletic plus the skills, they're going to struggle. And that's a really important distinction. We've had guys, we had a guy come in who was very athletic, straight off the bat, you know, able to explode out of positions, and, you know, from the get-go, within like a couple of months, he was giving a lot of the white belts really hard times, but he didn't really have any skill. And it's taken him a long time to kind of come back, step back, and now he's adding the skill back into it, and it's becoming much, much harder for his training partners, whether they're white belts, blue belts, anybody else. You know, and that's really, really fun. And then you also might have that super athletic guy who's just also gloms onto the technique really fast and gets promoted in like 6 months, a year, which is absolutely fine.
We have one that when he came in, he's kind of a younger kid.
Yeah.
When he came in, he was already super athletic and already like understood how to move, and then you add in some technique to that, and all of a sudden he's wrecking brown belts, and you're just going, okay, that we have to kind of move this along, because this is feeling bad for him, and it's feeling bad for everybody else, and it's looking bad for everybody. So like, those are things to consider.
But that's also, as an instructor, that's a conversation we need to have with him, and I have had with him as well, about what are his goals long term within jiu-jitsu.
So that we can put him on the right path to kind of peak at the right points, right?
The final one that we've kind of touched on a little bit is that they have a very limited skill set, and they have a refusal to deviate from that.
This can be anything. Like if you have a guy who only wants to play De La Riva and Baron-Bolos from everywhere, top, bottom, back, whatever, that is a problem for him. The same way refusing to adapt and only playing bottom half guard is a problem.
Yeah.
You especially at the lower belts, you cannot specialize. There is no specialization until you have a general knowledge.
Yeah.
You can have things you like.
Yeah.
But you cannot specialize.
One of my friends, very good competitor, like, you know, he did great across all of the color belts playing half guard, specifically half guard on one side, strong game using kimuras, using loop chokes, like kind of the old school plan B type sweeping and coming up to the back. That was all he did. And he did very well at every single colored belt until he got to black belt. And then what happened at black belt is the guys understand his game, they understand how to neutralize it, and they understand how to completely shut him down. It took him a really, really long time to then adapt and be even competitive at black belt. Like, he's never achieved the same success at black belt as he did in the lower belts because his game was so specific at the start and he didn't round out that skill set. So he's at a black belt level, then had to try to round out and create a broader skill set, which is very challenging to do because you're already so set in your ways.
Everybody experiences that to some degree at black belt. Like, you get there and you all of a sudden realize that you have all these weaknesses that you have to fill and like these gaps that you have to fill. But the goal is to then look back on your students and minimize those holes for them so that when they get to black belt, they're still going to find those things, but hopefully they're less than you had. Yeah. And then they go to their students and hopefully there's fewer when their students come up. And unless you are enforcing this from day one, they're going to experience that struggle at black belt the same way you did, or the same way, whoever.
Yeah, a really good example of this is the meows. Meows in the colored belts, just literally birimbolos and back takes was all they did. They actually had a pretty well-rounded game on the back of that.
They just didn't have to use it.
But they never really had to use it. So when they got to the black belt, what you saw is them still trying to do that stuff. That got defended, so they then had to go into other areas and into like passing. Yeah. So their passing, they then started to show and develop their passing game. So it's not...
But they always had... The difference is that they always had those fundamentals kind of behind them. Yeah. We're not saying that you can't go into competition and use your A game and be successful with your A game. The problem is like when all you have is an A game.
Yeah.
Eventually at black belt, you need a B, C, D, E game, because people know shit.
And that's where like having those pillars in mind at the start and building them from those foundations helps you when you get to the black belt level, because you might have an ultra specific game that you use in competition, but you have everything else that's supporting that around it so that you're successful.
Essentially, the goal for all of these blueprints is to build a black belt, not to build a blue belt or a purple belt or a brown belt. It's just like, these are markers on the path to black belt. This is when you hit blue belt, you should be this far along. When you hit purple belt, you should be this far along. And when you hit brown belt, you should be this far along. So that there's a short gap between brown and black belt. What we're trying to avoid is those times where you run up through the belts and then you have to stay at brown belt for 6 years. Or, you get stuck at purple belt for 5.5 years. Like, this doesn't have to happen.
Yeah.
You can progress through these belts in a really kind of measured way without worrying about it, as long as you're considering it holistically as a path towards black belt.
So that's everything that we have to say about this. It's quite a long, in-depth video, but I often hear instructors talk about this, particularly when they're new and they don't really have a lot of experience. It's like, how do I go about promoting? How do I recognize whether this person's ready?
Yeah.
And that's the primary reason we create these blueprints for instructors, so they understand what we use as a criteria, and for students, so they have an understanding of what they should be demonstrating as they go through, both technically, kind of more conceptually, and from a training standpoint as well. All right, so if you don't have anything like this, I would highly recommend putting something together. It doesn't have to be a very in-depth set of criteria, but it should
ours
be.
Isn't.
Yeah, ours is very loose.
It just has a couple of areas that we look at.
Yeah. But it should have enough information in there, and it should, you want to be looking at the person, those core fundamentals, the technical skills on top of that, and then any additional criteria that you have going through there. If you want copies of these are all available up on Escapology online. You can find them there. And if you need any other help in terms of running, developing, and growing your academy, please reach out to me at tom@escapology.bjj.com. I'm going to say that again because I fluffed it. tom@escapologybjj.com. And I'll be happy to try and help you.